Hey, I'm Lana from Lana Glowshot Art, and in this video, we'll be unboxing the December 2024 sketch box. This box is all about playful mark making and brushwork. Ready? Let's go. The surface in this month's box is the Sugarcane Watercolor Paper by Hanamule. This cold press watercolor paper is acid-free and is great for a variety of wet-on-wet techniques. Next, we have the Copic Acrea in silver. The Copic Acrea requires a bit of activation. Shake it vigorously for several seconds. Then press the clean nib into the surface of your paper. The acrylic ink will begin to flow and you're ready to start drawing. This tool is great for drawing on a variety of different surfaces and works over the top of all of the materials in this month's box. The prompt for this month is wreath. Let's warm up by drawing a few different things that we might see in a holiday wreath step by step. I'm starting out with some holly berries and holly leaves. For the berries, these are simple clusters of circles. And then as you move to the leaves, create sharp, jagged edges by drawing a scalloped or a convex edge around the leaf. You can play around with these as standalone objects or on a branch. The easiest way to draw a pine cone is creating several arching lines that build in quantity as you come towards the fattest part of the pine cone. Finish the shape off with a stem at the bottom and you're done. Another approach for drawing a pine cone is to start with more of a teardrop shape and then to open up these shapes as you move towards the base. For mistletoe, you'll start with branches and then add on some very soft, curved, simple leaves. Throw in a few berries and you're done. You can play around with the idea of drawing these as a bunch hanging upside down, or you can draw them as single sprigs and weave them into your final wreath design. Fir tree branches are a great way to add some texture to your doodles. Simply begin with one line, it can be curved or straight, and then fill in both sides of the line with tons of little pine needles. Next, we'll draw star anise. This begins almost like a flower with several petals coming out of the center and ending in points. You can come through each of these petals and add a small internal outline to create the star anise texture. You can also start with this same framework and add a couple of circles inside each of the inner outlines. Orange slices can be really festive as well. My main tip for this is don't outline everything with the exact same weight. That means vary the thickness or the thinness or even break the lines occasionally so that you have a little bit more interest within this relatively simple shape. Next, we'll draw some cinnamon. You want to imagine how the cinnamon stick is swirling in on itself. And I find that one of the easiest ways to do this is to draw a spiral and then connect it down into a long cylinder. Jingle bells, snowflakes, and fun little flourishes can also be great elements to add to your drawing. Our next product comes from Beam Paints, an indigenous-owned company that makes their paints by hand. This white birch palette comes with 3 colors: pine, orca, and turtle belly, and the Winsor & Newton Cotman round watercolor brush size 4. This brush creates a variety of beautiful marks that we'll use to create our florals. Turtle belly is a bright, brilliant shade of red that can be beautifully diluted to create subtle washes. Pine is similarly very bright and very brilliant. When you mix the pine and the turtle belly together, you can create more subtle variations of red and green, and if you mix them in equal quantities, you can even create a very neutral brown. Orca is a shimmery black, which can be used to add a little bit of pizzazz to your pieces and to deepen the value. Last but not least, we have the Daniel Smith Custom Watercolor Half Stick in Carbazole Violet. This watercolor stick can be held like a pastel and applied directly to your paper. You can also take this stick and draw into your palette, add some water, and now you have Carbazole Violet watercolor. If you choose to activate the stick once it's been applied to your paper dry, you can get really bright, vibrant shades and maintain some of the mark that you drew originally. Let's draw a couple of flowers together that we could put into our wreaths. First, I'm going to start with a sprig of lavender. I draw directly with my watercolor stick onto the paper and I keep my mark really loose and expressive. This is a quick 10-second sketch. When I activate with water, I'm doing so very loosely and expressively, so I'm maintaining the overall feel of the flower rather than drawing a ton of teeny individual petals. I'm also going to paint a coneflower using a different approach. Here, I start with a carbazole violet wash of color, and while the paint is wet, I grab my watercolor stick and add the texture of the petals right on top. This wet on wet approach keeps a little bit of a softer edge to my mark, but because I'm moving quickly, I'm able to keep that playful, expressive mark. I finish off these flowers with my beam paints, mixing up some pine to add for the stem and the leaves, and using a bit of that turtle belly in various shades to create the texture and the shape of the center of the coneflower. We'll warm up with our watercolors by painting a few florals that we can incorporate into our wreaths. For a rose, I begin with several dots in the center, and then I create sweeping petals with a swooping brush stroke around the outside of these dots. Mixing the turtle belly and the carbazole violet gives me a deep red violet that I'm going to use on my next rose with the exact same format. Dots in the center and then swooping petals around the outside. For a lavender or a lupine flower, you can create a wet on wet approach with really watered down paint and then dropping in more concentrated paint in little dots. For this flower, I actually start with a few dots in the center, then I load my brush up with water and I pull a petal out of each of these drops of paint. This is an even more loose abstract approach. As you continue to play around with different shapes for your petals, it can be a petal simply because you said and decided it would be a petal. When it comes to painting branches and leaves, being able to hold a really thin, fine line is key. You're going to do this by applying just the slightest bit of pressure and dragging the tip of the paintbrush across your paper. Then, for the leaves, see if you can do this in 2 strokes. Swoop, swoop. For fir tree branches, I really like a combination of the orca and pine because this gives me a nice cool green. I draw these the same way I did with the Copic acrea, with one thin line in the center and several small pines coming off in either direction. For the pine cone, I begin by mixing up a brown, which is a combination of turtle belly and pine. Then I apply the prongs of the pine cone in a very organic approach, fanning out from the top and then creating smaller brush strokes that represent the profile of the prongs towards the bottom. In this month's basic unboxing video, I go over a couple other techniques for painting pine cones, so be sure to check that out. Mastering these creative abstract florals is a lot about practice. Take the time to try out a variety of techniques, invent your own marks, and play around with a variety of colors until you feel confident with your marks. For the first wreath that we're going to create together, I want this to be really responsive. So we're going to begin with a wet on wet approach. Drop a ton of water in a wreath shape onto your paper. Then pick up a lot of wet paint on your brush and drop it right in. Be sure to use all of your colors and even combinations of your colors as you apply the paint. And then just step back and see what happens. Another fun thing to do with a wet on wet approach is to sprinkle a bit of paint onto the paper. Let your wet on wet painting dry completely, and this can take a while because your sugarcane watercolor paper is highly absorbent and holds a ton of water. Then with my Copic acrea, I come back in anywhere that I feel like it, and I'm adding some of those elements that we practiced drawing earlier. I've added some branches with leaves. I can add in some fir branches, some pine cones, some hollyberry leaves. This is your opportunity to play and explore and be super intuitive with your approach. Whenever you feel ready, jump into your watercolors and begin adding floral elements in. These floral elements can be a response to some of the unexpected shapes that develop in the wet on wet underpainting. They can also be elements that you would like to practice a little bit more before you move into more complicated and planned pieces. Let me show you one other way that you can use your watercolor stick. You can hold it in your non-painting hand and dip your wet paintbrush right onto the stick. This allows you to use super saturated color and give your painting a massive pop. As you begin to build up your wreath intuitively, play around with design concepts including balance, repetition, and pattern. It might be fun to draw several roses, but varying them slightly in size, color, even orientation. You might also consider developing a focal point in your wreath. For this last wreath that we're going to work on together, I'm going to zoom way in so that we're looking just at a corner of the wreath. And then with my Copic Acrylic Silver, I'm going to begin to sketch out some of the elements that I want to use. Notice that I'm not drawing every single detail here, it's just an impression to get started. The circles in the center are jingle bells, and I want them to look metallic. So I begin by putting a very light wash of violet mixed with orca on the entire thing. And then I drop in bits of pine and turtle belly so that it feels reflective of the environment around it, which will be filled with green and red florals on my wreath. For this first layer of paint, my goal is to have it really soft and really light, and I'm definitely leaning into those wet on wet effects. This is going to help me create a really soft backdrop so that I have the depth in my painting and not a lot of white showing through the layers of the wreath. It's also going to give me an opportunity to lay out all the features in my painting and help me get a feel for where everything will be and if I like the composition before coming in with more and more detail. I'm allowing myself to be really open and curious about the wet on wet effects that are outside of my control, and I allow the paints to bleed together. I want a little bit of paint on every part of my wreath. So if I'm not entirely sure what to put there, I'm just dropping in a light wash of one of my colors, trying really hard to create a variety and balance within my composition. I allow this to dry completely, and now I'm coming in with the second layer of paint. And my mindset for this second layer is to get my details a little bit more anchored and to work on the contrast. After adding a bit more contrast to the jingle bell with orca and the carbazole violet, I began to add berries all over my wreath. As I paint the berries, this is really just 2 strokes, but I'm leaving space for a highlight so that they feel 3-dimensional with as little work as possible. I am varying the number of berries in each cluster, the size of the berries, and I'm varying the temperature and the value of the berries by adding some carbazole violet or orca into some of my washes of turtle belly so that I get a wide variety. This helps me bring the red throughout the wreath and helps me establish some balance before I come in with the next element. The pine cone is a great place to bring in some deeper darks, and I'm doing that with a combination of just about every color to mix up a really deep brown that complements the brown that I've already used. I can save this dark color off to the side and bring it in anytime that I want. And now I'm going to bounce around using a variety of different greens and painting in leaves and fir branches. I strongly recommend that you explore how many different kinds of greens you can make on your palette. Add in the turtle belly to your pine, add in a bit of carbazole violet to your pine, and also try that orca pine combination. With a variety of greens, you're going to be able to create more depth in your painting and more variety. Once this layer is dry, I decided to pop back in with my Copic Acrylic. I am using line throughout the wreath to add emphasis to the leaves and to the jingle bell and even some highlights on the pine cone. This helps that silver that I used at the beginning feel more intentional, more cohesive, and belong to the full painting. I often start and end my pieces near the focal point, which for this piece are the jingle bells. I wanted a little bit more contrast in my jingle bells, so I grabbed a wet paper towel and pulled a little bit of the pigment off of the jingle bell. Then I came back in with darker darks, again a combination of orca and carbazole violet, and added a little bit more emphasis. I popped around the entire painting, adding a couple more darks here and there so that I could really get different elements of my painting to pop. And now this piece is complete. I hope you learned a ton about working playfully with watercolor, and we can't wait to see what you create. So be sure to use the hashtag SketchboxDecember when you post your work online. For more unboxing videos and tutorials, you can check out our YouTube page where you can like and subscribe. Thanks so much for watching. See you next time.